thanks for coming on the podcast.
Jake, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you in. How is your year going so far? How is it returning to Gilman to teach a little bit?
It's great. It's been a very interesting experience walking through the halls again and then seeing a lot of faces that I remember and a lot of faces that are new, which is, it's good to see the tradition of Gilman being carried on by a new generation of teachers, and then also see the still the same sort of ethos of the kids and the excitement that's in the halls of just being here. Even with COVID, you still see it in everyone walking around, or even just walking past the lower school playing sports.
The lower school for sure. Those guys are excited. They don't care about the mask. They wear the mask. They're still having a good time out there.
Yeah, but no, it's been good. I mean, I'm still sort of transitioning in my life now out of the military, and just to be here and be back, and I moved back in with my parents, so it's like in the same house that I was when I was a student at Gilman, now coming as a teacher. It's very bizarre, but
yeah, it's a weird set of circumstances, but we're excited to have you back here, and it's been great to get to know you in the few times that we've kind of sat down and talked a little bit. So I know Gilman is very happy that you're back here teaching for the semester, right?
For the semester. Yeah, so it's lucky to get the chance to do it in this sort of time in my life, and who knows, one day down the road, but at least for now.
I was looking at your syllabus, Perspectives in Modern War is the course, and you have a lot of really good stuff on there that maybe we can talk a little bit about, how you formulated this syllabus and decided what you wanted to teach in your semester back at Gilman.
Yeah, so I'm very lucky to have the opportunity to teach the course, and it was Mr. Hubeck's sort of idea and thought when I was back, and I had this time to try and teach an elective, and I built it a lot from sort of my path, I guess, as this whole conversation goes, but like what I've learned over my past 7 years in the military, and then about decision making and self-awareness, and how I could pass that on to high schoolers, what I would have wanted to know when I was leaving high school, and try to make it translatable. I've had a lot of interesting experience, met a lot of amazing people in my time in the military, and that's a lot of what the course is. I'm trying to get a lot of guest speakers to come in and talk about their perspectives, which is great for the kids, but it's also great for a lot of my friends who don't get the opportunity to try and express their time in the military either. So it's a nice way to give back, I think, on both ends, and I'll start to have some more guest speakers come in now. But really, when I was thinking of building it, I thought of Tribe, Sebastian Junger's book that describes homecoming and belonging, and what it means to experience trauma and recover from trauma, and what we can learn about those experiences and how they pull us together or pull us apart. And it's a perfect book for the world of COVID right now, where we're all sort of experiencing this external threat to our society, our relationships, our family relationships, and then again with the political divisions in our country of sort of attacking every layer of everything that we are. So that what can we do to strengthen our bonds as a society within either person to person or sort of a larger sense? I think it's a perfect one to start with. And we've jumped off in the course to start it that way, but I'm going to trace some of my experience in the military as well in the course. I'm going to have some portions on information warfare, which again gets into the disruption of social media and how have online actors pretending to be other people, interfering in the elections in 2016. And then you have moving from there is sort of like in decision making in general, thinking about how do you make decisions in difficult situations, and then closing the course probably with some more take on modern war and drone warfare, which is a sort of interesting, different experience that is not much written about it now, at least because it's still so new in the past 10, 15 years. So a lot of interesting things you get to talk about and pass on, and try to communicate the experience that I had and make it relatable for other people who won't have the same experiences I did or go into other different roles later on in college and beyond.
I'm really glad you brought Tribe in, and that's a book that you're teaching and focusing on in the course. When did you find Tribe? I think it was recommended to me in college, and Sebastian Junger is someone who was on Joe Rogan's podcast, which I've said it before, I'm a huge fan of his podcast, and he's on there twice talking about Tribe and the experiences he's had at war, and exactly what you said, the sense of belonging with the guys in his group. I think he was a journalist over in Afghanistan maybe, but when he came back, it was that sense of loss and alienation that is interesting, coming back to America, that you can miss what was going on in the Middle East. He had a sense of like, I wish I was back there almost, and that's the case for a lot of, and maybe you could speak to this a little bit more than I can, but a lot of vets and people who have served come back and they almost miss their experience overseas.
Yeah, I think he describes it really well with a lot of different vignettes in his story, but one of the ones that he talks about is how he had, when he was a journalist in Afghanistan, very high intensity unit up in northeast Afghanistan, and one of the guys he was with, who he quotes in the book, Brendan O'Byrne, he was at a party with him, and someone who was a psychologist who knew he'd been through a lot of war trauma asked him, what do you miss about the war? And he responded, ma'am, I miss almost all of it. And it's it doesn't make any sense for what you would think, because they were in the worst sort of combat. They lost, different soldiers during the experience, which is obviously the most traumatic thing you can do, is to lose someone at war. And it's still the sense of, I miss so much of that togetherness and solidarity and everything we were doing that made sense of, we were together and working for yourself and sacrificing for each other. So I read this book that when I came back from my first deployment, I was in a very different scenario than the high intensity combat. I was mostly doing or part of drone warfare in the sense of sort of the modern war element. Still very bizarre experience and strange to, it's not something that's really well trained for yet, to prepare you to make decisions where you're, actually going after ISIS and terrorists in using drones to target and strike them. Very weird and strange to be sort of removed from it by a TV screen, but at the other end of the TV screen that real people are dying and you're making real effects, and you have to live with those and understand those. And every life that is lost is a tragedy in some way, whether it is someone who deserves it in the case of war or someone that doesn't. Every single one's a tragedy, and you have to live with that when you come home and understand all the decisions you made and you were a part of. So I read this in 2017, right after I got back from my first deployment. It helped put some of that feeling in perspective and sort of understand what I did and what my team did and what we went through. And then to go back, I was preparing for a second deployment at the time, so I was like very much still in the mode of wanting to continue to serve or needing to continue to serve, but I sort of understood that a little better, and it's helped me. I've read it a few times now. Reread it for the course, but what we can learn from that, I think, is important. Because when I was deployed at a different level, I still felt that brotherhood and togetherness of being part of the unit. And then, when you go home and people, me transitioning out of the military, you sort of lose that brotherhood at some point. It's a different experience you try to hold on to in different ways. So he describes a lot of good other civilian examples too. There's the London Blitz, and it's sort of the feeling during the Blitz that's talked about sometimes is that, people in London came together and sort of had that sense of solidarity, even though there was so much loss and devastation and destruction in London during that time. So it's like, how do we learn from that? It's like, he described suicides that went down. People said they didn't drink any more or less. And the same sort of feeling that we felt, at least briefly, all of us, who were alive for it after 9/11, of that sense of national unity. Junger also uses the example of mass shootings and how that's a horrible, obviously very tragic expression of something being wrong with our society in general. But after 9/11, 2 years, we didn't have any what would be considered mass shootings in the sense of what they describe it in sort of the academic way. And we see that now again with COVID. Is that because we haven't had a mass shooting, 5 or more people, since February? It's very sad that is only the February 2020, that's only the break we get. But is that because we have this external threat, or is that because people aren't gathering? We can't say for sure, but at least we're sort of understanding that there could be some togetherness we feel now because of COVID that's keeping things like that are such metrics of a symptom of something being wrong with society that happened.
Yeah, it makes me wonder what about these traumatic experiences forges such strong, close-knit bonds between people that can't and aren't replicated in modern day American society. And I think Junger talks about this in the book, but what is it about trauma and war and these examples he brings up, like the Blitz, that force people to coexist in more close knit, almost loving ways than that's missing here in modern society.
Yeah, I think Junger, the most concise answer would be Junger's sense of sacrifice, is that we have no reason to sacrifice for each other in modern society because of all the comforts that we have. But when you're in a unit abroad as part of a small knit combat team, or you have something like a traumatic event force you to sacrifice for each other, and that sense of I'm going to sacrifice for you, you're going to sacrifice for me, that's a dependability that we don't really feel in modern society from day to day, even with close friends or sometimes even with family. And that is what's missing from our society, is the sense that we live and work for each other and we're willing to sacrifice for each other. And Junger's other good example is using the Native American tribes and sort of their sense of cohesion, or societal cohesion, how they sacrificed or worked together and had a cohesive society that we just don't have in our capitalist modern society, which has its lot of benefits and comfort. But it's like, what can we learn from those societies that have seemed to sacrifice for each other more and bring each other together more? I think that's the big thing we try to. What can we pull out of this for us now?
Were these vignettes that Junger uses in the book Tribe realistic for you when you were returning back to the United States after being overseas? Were you relating maybe more so to what he's talking about in your return to modern society?
What those, not as from the large sense of society, not as much. I think what I was putting in context was the sort of life and death experiences that I was involved in, or sort of understanding what it means to come back to that. And he talks a lot about people who experience trauma who have different reactions, and sort of your body has different responses to it. And I think he does a good job of describing evolutionarily why we want to sleep lightly if we experience trauma, why you want to have nightmares, why you want to be angry, why you want to be depressed, because that's your body keeping you alive in a different way. And so when you have sort of small examples of things that happen, or experiences that you remember, that you sort of remember in a bad way, you're like, okay, this makes sense. This is why I'm remembering it this way. One of the lines that Junger uses is he starts one of his chapters saying, "This is the first time I knew I had a problem." And he talks about sort of a panic attack that he had in a subway. And I think I've used, I obviously didn't experience the level of trauma that he did in any of his units, but still with my life or death experience that I remember being a part of, my memory of that, I've had different moments of sort of my heart beating out of my chest, and it's like, okay, I understand why I'm remembering it, and my body's doing this. There's nothing wrong with me.
This is a natural.
It's a natural thing, and it's hard to accept at first. It's like, well, yeah, it's like something's wrong. Yeah. I don't want to tell anyone about this. They'll think I'm messed up or something. But
right.
At the end of the day, it's better to just be, open about, this is what happened, this is what I'm feeling, and to communicate it and learn from it and understand that, it's natural. All of us experience trauma in a different way. I was with a good friend a few nights ago, and we're talking about this. He's another Marine, and he had said that, yeah, you go to war and you come back, you might have the same level of trauma as someone who got into a really bad car accident. It's true. It could be very similar to what someone else has experienced. It doesn't make you any different from, anyone else who experienced trauma in different ways. So it's just important to just say that, yes, I experienced it. Yes, these are the feelings I still have about it. This is what's lingering, and I'm learning from it. But all of us in society have this sort of shared sense of something went wrong, whatever level it is, whether it's something, life or death, to a spectrum of something just sort of being an emotional disappointment or loss or failure. It's all on the spectrum of learning from it. And to normalize that spectrum and normalize that understanding of trauma and growth from trauma, we have to be able to communicate it and have to be able to talk about it, which isn't easy. It took me, years to talk about the sort of feelings that I had after my deployment, to be able to be open about it and say, sometimes my heart will beat out of my chest or something like that when something's brought up. It's hard to admit that, but you learn that's the right thing to do and the best way to communicate it.
So some of the examples that he shares in the book about people missing their experiences overseas, or missing traumatic experiences because those connections with fellow soldiers or people you shared the experience with were so strong. Do you miss your experiences sometimes? Like, do you kind of wish you were overseas in those dangerous areas that you were put into?
Yeah, I don't think you definitely miss the overall experience or parts of it. You don't miss bad things happening.
Yeah.
But it's the backdrop of those things happening that like sort of forces the unit and the cohesion. I'm very happy to be back in the U.S. and not in Western Iraq. But it is a weird, the relationships, and if I wasn't lucky with family or I wasn't lucky with the friend group that I have, I could very easily think, man, it was super fun at points. Like, yeah, we went through some difficult decisions and bad things, but we'd still have like moments to relax and sort of talk about it and be that unit and be with people who understood what you went through as well, where you could just talk about it and not have to explain it. So you miss it at a certain point, especially if you come home and you don't have that group of family and friends to support you. So there's so many great things that support veterans in our society now, but a lot of them, people just don't know about, or even veterans themselves don't know about. I'm still learning things about the VA that I didn't know that are out there to support, people like me or people who had similar deployments. So it's something to learn. I think you're always going to miss that relationship and that sense that you had. It's like being on a good team. I mean, you still could miss the team that you were on, and you did some things together, and you can sort of reminisce. It's just a little harder to reminisce, I think, when it's the bizarre experience of war rather than sports or something else like that.
So when you're discussing tribe in your classes, what are some of the ideas or topics that come up in conversation with the group for the senior elective course that you're teaching?
Yeah, one of them I think is a very useful, like, modern event is the Capitol riot, and thinking about how people are either manipulated to think a certain way about whatever spectrum you're on of the event that actually happened. There was a really good article written by a Marine, former Marine who's now writer, Eliot, another book that we're going to read that he wrote called Places and Names. A very good nonfiction telling the story of the rise of ISIS from his perspective, being a former Marine who served in various capacities, but most famously in Fallujah in 2004. So he wrote a opinion article about how the Capitol riot reminded him of combat, and sort of that strange sense of history that he felt crossing the road into Fallujah to start the clearance of Fallujah in 2004. He said that watching those videos, he could see that sense of history of the people breaking into the Capitol and then seeing, walking through those areas with all the paintings and understanding they're in a very, special building, and had broken in and sort of had that awestruck moment. So the other thing he described is the sort of stupefied feeling you see when you face a traumatic event. And that was his last description of the protester actually getting shot right at the edge of their sort of front line. And people were just, when they saw it, they weren't scared or afraid. They just felt stupefied. And he says that's how you feel in combat too. And I, from my limited experience in sort of the drone warfare world, I can imagine that, the first time I saw a truck blow up on screen, it wasn't, I wasn't in danger, so it wasn't scary, but it was just sort of strange rather than something being, really weird. But anyway, I think that the Capitol riot has been something that we've talked about a little bit as sort of an example of our tribe and what's wrong with our tribe and what we can learn from it, and also learn from the trauma and people experience all around. COVID, that's obviously pervasive through all of our lives, but that effect that I mentioned earlier of we have not had a mass shooting since February 2020. Is that something that's due to COVID because of that external threat that we're feeling? But it's good to, these are definitely, themes that will, resonate throughout all of our lives of experiencing bad things happening and learning from it. So there'll be more, I'm sure, that we'll pick up and keep talking about.
Yeah, and I think the experience of knowing you're living through a historical moment is interesting to talk about this year specifically with your classes, because in the instances you described, it sounds like the people involved knew they were a part of history. And I think for us living today, we all know COVID it's history. I mean, this is an insane time in our lives, and I think maybe the seniors can't relate so much to what it's like to be at war, but they can relate to the experience of living through a historical moment. It's just bizarre and weird and tough to wrap your mind around when you're in it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the sort of going back to the important idea of the spectrum of trauma, of just understanding we all have experienced bad things and can learn from it and have different responses to it. I've had some students in the class who've said, well, I haven't had anything bad happen to me. And it's like, well, that's good to be humble and aware that clearly you don't have something bad as other people, and we're very lucky for that. But we all have things that go wrong, or relationships that have been broken, or things to learn from. So I think COVID's a great example of we have all been through something difficult at different levels, because we've all experienced it in a different way and have been, fortunate or unfortunate in a different way. But we can all sort of have that compassion and empathy to understand this was something bad that I went through. What did I learn from it, or how can I grow?
Along the lines of tribe, I'm curious your thoughts on how maybe COVID is making individuals more cohesive or alienating people more, from maybe your perspective as someone who's had the closest bonds that you can really find at war, and looking out on what's going on in our country right now, and whether things are alienating people more or bringing us closer together at all.
Yeah, I think Junger himself was probably watching the beginning of COVID and hoping this would be the experience he sort of wrote about, because this book he wrote in 2014, so well before any of this could have started happening, or we could even get close to thinking it. But I wonder, I think we've gone both ways in some ways. We've had serious political divisions. I think the fact that 2020 was an election year made it worse for everyone. If it hadn't been an election year, we might have experienced more national unity. Hopefully we can start to feel that national unity now that we have a break from any upcoming elections, where we'll have either the media or politicians trying to be divisive as possible just to get elected. So I think it could have gone both ways. I'm hopeful that it will be more of a national unity event as we transition out post the vaccine. There have been moments of selflessness and people working together. I saw all the food donations people were doing for healthcare workers at the beginning, right when things were shut down. There were groups doing donations from restaurants, trying to keep small businesses running and giving them to hospitals. We've seen so many people donate masks and sacrifice for one another. Going back to that, of the sense of hospital workers, healthcare workers are sacrificing for us. Let's try and sacrifice for them and give something for them too. So that sense was there. Was it strong? It was, but was it told enough? Probably not, because it was probably drowned out in the misinformation, disinformation surrounding either the disease itself or the upcoming election. So hopeful, but I don't think we've seen it entirely as being too much unifying.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing to me. Even last night, like when it seems like everyone's watching the Super Bowl, like a football game is one thing that can bring our country together, even if it's just for a few hours. Like everyone is watching the Super Bowl glued to the TV at home with their families. There's no, Twitter wars, misinformation. It's just the Super Bowl. It's something to rally around as a country. And it's weird that it takes a game. I mean, it's just bizarre how we operate as human beings, but it takes a game to do that, even if it's just for a brief amount of time.
But thank God we have that, at least. We got something that brings us together still. And, we're lucky we even had the season this year. I remember thinking we weren't going to have it at all. And then, feeling the togetherness of Baltimore being in the playoffs again. I always loved that sense. And when we lost the Bills, it was like, well, at least we had that, for a moment.
Yeah, at least there's something on to watch. And, I think concerts and music is the ultimate unifying experience, because even with sports, like you're still rooting for someone. There's still kind of some kind of animosity towards the other side. But with music, it's like if you go to a concert, everyone in that venue is on the same page. Everyone's happy. Everyone's having a good time. So that's one thing that's COVID has stripped from society that is unifying, I think, is music, concerts.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I remember the artists doing sort of their live stuff right at the beginning when no one was going out. And that was a nice thing to regular artists playing. Then Chris Martin from Coldplay was just like playing around, and
He's the best.
yeah, just said like, "Oh, you want me to play that?" It's like, that song's older than you are. It's like, but I mean, that was cool. But because of the digital world, it's not as much of being together in a concert and all like sort of experiencing it together. So it's difficult stuff.
Yeah, it's hard to find things like that right now. But some of the other course materials on your syllabus that I was looking at, Redeployment is another book of short stories that I was looking to use in my classes. And along the lines of what we were talking about, I think it might be the first story in Redeployment about the dogs. Is that something that you teach?
Yeah, I'm going to pick a few of those out. I'm not sure if I'll pick that one, but Phil Clade is he's Marine now author similar to Eliot and he's got a lot of good ways to communicate that experience, which I think is different from a civilian writing about war. Not that a civilian can't do that very well. He just has sort of that unique perspective to write about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. So much of your syllabus is fiction. I mean, it's based on Phil Clay's experiences and Tim O'Brien's experiences at war, but you still implement a lot of fiction and literature into your syllabus, which I appreciate as an English teacher, but I found that interesting how you did that.
Yeah, I think the stories, Things They Carry describes it very well, of sort of sometimes the truth can be expressed through fiction even better than it could be expressed through the truth. Phil Clay, and there'll be another fiction story, Ohio, which is a non-military author who wrote, very, very good stories about sort of the military experience and coming home from that, which communicates the sort of the truth that we're trying to understand and learn from in the class, which is, more of the English perspective for sure.
So thinking a little bit about your decision or your wanting to join the Marines and be in the military, when did that play out for you? When did that first happen for you, or what maybe inspired you to want to join the military?
In the story term of how it happened, I would say it was my grandfather's funeral, who served in World War II, and they did military honors for him as he was, buried. And that moment, I remember thinking, there's nothing more important I could do with my life than serve. This is a guy who served for 4 years during World War II as a sailor, and then spent the rest of his life living in Baltimore and raising a family. But still, as he's remembered and being buried, it's his military service that matters. And I did have the moment while I was a junior. I was a junior in high school when that happened. I did have that moment remembering that and thinking that. He didn't talk much about the war at all or his experiences. Right before he died, he gave me these coins from his time in Australia during World War II, just coincidentally, obviously. And I've remembered him, and I remembered my other grandfather, who I'm actually named after, who's luckily still alive, who's a Navy intel officer. And there are two people I looked up to in my life very closely. And if there's anyone I wanted to be like, it was them, to live up to their, sense of honor or sense of selflessness or serving others, very much family men who were giving back to the family and helping to support us and wise in teaching. So it is looking up to my grandfathers. I had sort of a, circuitous path to actually joining, because after I teach this summer, I'm going off to med school and becoming a doctor, which has been my long-term dream since really high school, since Gilman, I guess. When I knew, sort of liked the science classes I was taking, loved the teachers that I had here, and inspired me to want to, serve as a doctor later down the road. But when I got to college, watching the wars, and I sensed right after the surge in Afghanistan in 2011, I sensed my generation and my, a lot of people my age were fighting at war and sacrificing for each other, and I was not. And that was my really drive to get in and serve and be a part of it. By 2014, when I graduated, all those wars had drawn down almost completely. So I'd sort of missed it in that sense. But in 2014, as in the course, talking about the rise of ISIS, June 2014 is the, sort of when ISIS was known on the map. And ISIS would be the terrorist group that I would spend my time in the military trying to, fight against or work to disrupt as much as we could. So that became what I would be serving for, other than serving for our country and serving for our Marines. That was sort of the external threat that unified us. But it was, they obviously didn't exist in 2012 when I signed up to join. I still just thought that I was watching the wars before and knew that my generation was doing it, and that, I wanted to be a part of it.
Sounds like a lot of your aspirations originated here at Gilman in high school almost. Your desire to become a doctor, your desire to join the military. Then you went on to Harvard and you were part of the ROTC there. What was that experience like?
Yeah, it was. So I had a lot of friends at Gilman who were applying to the Naval Academy or applying to West Point. That was honestly my first sort of thought of, well, I mean, maybe I should think about doing something like this too. And I applied for ROTC, which I would do during college. But I actually ended up switching programs and did just the Marine program in the summers, which was a better experience for me than ROTC, because ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps, is you're in college, but you're also doing training. You have to go to class in your uniform, sort of very visible as sometimes you have to go to class in your uniform, sort of very, very visible as a member of the military. When I was in the Marine program, I was completely incognito, only trained in the summer. No one really knew that I was joining the military until I commissioned the day before graduation and, officially started active duty then. So I liked being, living between two worlds without having to mix them. But it was Harvard had a lot of, team experiences that I started at Gilman of sort of being part of a community and sacrificing for each other. And I loved being part of a team. And I knew that at some level being in the military, you'd be sort of using those experiences of leadership that I had on teams at Gilman to pass on at a different level. So a lot of things I learned that I ended up transferring, but my time in college, I didn't really mix my worlds of military and being a student, which is also very difficult just because of the academic rigor, or being a teammate and not really wanting to go to MIT to do my military training.
How often did you have to do training? Was it every day? Was it every couple times a week, or what was that like?
So I was officially in RTC for a semester my freshman spring, and I had to go to I think I went to MIT 3 days a week for physical training or class or something like that. We bounced around, which doesn't sound like too much, but then I've got practice on top of that.
Is it in the morning typically?
In the morning, yeah. So I jump on the tee and get down, and then go on the tee back and be wearing my little Army jacket. So it's sort of funny to imagine seeing other students. If I saw them now in the subway, it'd be very different to think of that.
Yeah.
Be like, good luck. But no, I ended up getting out of that partially just because of it was sort of, again, a circuitous path. I actually dropped out because I thought I'd just be a doctor. I was like, well, I'll just join and be a doctor in the military. I did a semester thinking that, and then still, again, watching the wars from 2011 to 2012, I thought I gotta join now. I don't want to wait to join, because if I was a doctor, I'd be joining right now pretty much. It'd be 2020, 2021, and it'd been 7 years from college. Too long for me to wait, somewhat impatient. And that's why I ended up jumping in the Marine program. So wouldn't let me back into ROTC because I dropped out. So I was like, well, I'll try the Marine program then. And they let me in. So
right when you graduated, you were signed up for the Marines, you were going into the Marines. What was the training and the process to deployment like in the Marine Corps?
So it was the Marines do interesting training where every officer goes through 6 months of the same school. So it's sort of a unifying, again, like makes a tribe of officers because you all know each other or have similar experiences. So probably partially why they do it. In that 6-month school, you're basically applying the whole time to do a specialty. So when you in the military, obviously, has people with different specialties. Some people are communications, some people are intelligence, infantry. It can be a pilot. So I wanted to be a ground intelligence officer, which was a mix between infantry and intel. So it's the infantry sense of really being on the ground and serving with the guys who are in combat or the guys who are on the front line. That's really what infantry means from a sort of outside perspective. And then intel is a little more analysis to sort of have some back end interesting, I think, to the sense of thinking about what the enemy's doing and trying to get it from the enemy's perspective more than you do already in infantry. So ground intelligence in the Marines allowed me to fuse both of those drives and interests, and that led me to go through the 6 months training, went through 3 months of intensive infantry training, which is sort of the main course that infantry officers go through in the Marines. Learned a lot in that school, and that was one of the best leadership experiences I had, and things that I'll still remember and think about from time to time, of like that brotherhood that we had in that school. A lot of great friends from it, and also the sort of moments of failure I had in that, and then the moments of success. I think the most success I ever had in training was due to patience, or being so patient, and in a way, in as much as you can be selfless and working for other people. And I remember thinking later in life, when I'm not as patient, I'm like, man, I was a little better back then. Mm-hmm. But went through Scout Sniper employment training. So not a trained sniper. It's a 3-week course that you just learn how to employ Scout Snipers. And then I went to an intel school for 3 months as well after that. And then I was fully trained. So it was pretty much about, a year and a half of training to get me to my unit in California as a Scout Sniper platoon commander, to lead that, group of Marines up for deployment. And that was May 2016. So May 2014, pretty much in May 2016, took about 2 years of training to actually get out into the real military, where I was really part of an operation.
During this time, what were some of the aspects of leadership you learned, and maybe how does leadership function in the Marines that you didn't really realize or know before you had joined?
Yeah, I think I got a lot of lessons in leadership. I think as a sort of captain of a sports team, you have your always, and I thought was really good, and Coach Neil Gaby was a volleyball coach back when I was here, always really good about thinking about instilling lead by example. Lead by example is huge in the military. But there's also sort of the level of where you have to be hard on someone as well. And I think that's what I balanced when I was on deployment, of learning. I'm not a yeller at all. You guys can probably imagine I don't yell very often. But I had to yell at points. I had to be angry when things went wrong, or things that, so I'm not very good at it. Don't like it either, but it's just like there has to be a moment to influence certain people. The way you're going to do it is to be sort of soft and pull them aside and say, this is what, you really messed up there. Or the way you're going to do it is yell in front of everyone, you really messed up there. It's like, and you have to think about leadership. I guess what I didn't know, you can have your own philosophy. You can think this is how I'm going to lead, but your subordinates or your team or whoever you're leading, you need to have a different way to reach every single one of them, pretty much. At least that's unified and unified, so it's not false. But if you reach one of your Marines differently than another, that's okay. You just have to be able to build that differently. I learned the most about leadership from the actual Marines that were in my platoon, who would really teach me and help me out and say, "No, you're really not. We need to do something a little better now for that." One of the things I learned from them was, we were sitting down, it was with my team leaders, it was before our deployment, and there was some complaining about the platoon, about the intensity of the training as we were getting ready. It's like, we need more time off, or something like that. And I said something to the effect of, we really shouldn't be complaining as much as we are. I generally don't think complaining is good. I'm not like a big complainer, but other people, I think it's a healthy way to actually express yourself. And that's something I sort of learned eventually, is that you're better if you let other people complain or vent, which I was never good at. And my Marine, who hopefully is going to come guest speak at some point for the course, just turned to me, it's like, "Sir, I gripe up, I don't gripe down." It's like, okay, that makes sense. I understand what you're saying now. You're not complaining down, because then if you're complaining down, everyone thinks like, man, this place is terrible, everything's going wrong. But if you can gripe up to me and say, this is what's wrong, this needs to fix, but trust me that I'm not complaining to my subordinates or complaining to my team. So I learned a lot in that sense of trust, of saying, understanding that this person could be complaining to me, but I have to trust him that he is doing the right things with his team, and learning from that. And trust is a big thing I learned from sort of leading a team before we were getting ready for deployment. I remember one exercise where one of my sniper team leaders was telling me, or I had to tell one of my sniper team leaders to move to a different position. It takes a long time for a sniper team to set up and get everything right. You think about security, they have to be in the right area to look at sort of the enemy that they're trying to look at. And I had to tell him to move because someone else in the battalion, our big unit, had made a mistake. and they had to move because of that other person had made a mistake. And he, the team leader, didn't really trust that I was doing everything to try and defend him, but I had to tell him to move at this point. I tried to make the difference in the same way of griping up, not griping down. I tried to say as much as I can to defend them from moving and doing all that issues that they had to do to move. And then eventually, he had to move, and he understood. But after that, it was the lesson of, like, you have to trust me as well. I got to trust you, but you got to trust me that I have all your best interests in mind and I'm doing the best I can. So trust, I think, is the biggest thing in leadership, and understanding that I sort of learned. And, it takes a lot of time to earn it with the people you're with. But leading by example, unselfishness, empathy, seeing from them, those are the key things, I think, that help you build that trust and maintain it.
It's interesting the comparisons you make with playing sports. I've been doing a couple short episodes on the podcast, about 30, 40 minutes. And the first one we had was Coach Nostrand, lacrosse coach here. And we were talking about leadership a little bit, mostly about building culture for a program. And one of the things he said about leadership was his core element is trust. And I was looking at your syllabus too, and you have a segment on leadership with John Wooden, and John Wooden's a part of your course too. So I find it interesting how you relate sports to, to what you were doing in the Marines.
Yeah, and the military relates what it does back to sports. John Wooden we read John Wooden's book in my infantry officer course, the intensive infantry training I did as a Marine. And I was like, this is what leadership is from that perspective. And military is very big, and doing things by the basics, brilliance in the basics. Same with John Wooden, and sort of how to put on your socks and how to tie your shoes that he starts with all his teams. So I think leadership, another great sort of quote that I've always remembered is that leadership doesn't change, only leaders do. And I think that is the same. There's a sense that all of our leadership lessons work together, whether it's it's a business, whether it's a team that you're leading, or whether you're leading in the military. I think it's all of those lessons overlap, and it's something we can learn from.
Yeah, I taught in the fall a course, a senior elective on leadership, and it was English based, but we had a lot of historical figures that we looked at. And one of the questions that we constantly talked about was whether leadership is something that you learn in your life and something that you can pick up and a trait you can learn, really, or something that you're just born with. Like, from a military perspective and the people that you got to know, and really from your own experience, what do you think the answer is to that question? Is it a mix of both? Are people born leaders, or are there skills that you can learn and pick up along the way to make you a leader?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's also something that you're asked as you're going through military training, sort of understanding and studying leadership. I think it's both. There are qualities you're born with that are strong for being a leader, but there's so much that you learn in a sense of nurture that you do. And the qualities that you're born with to be a leader are very small compared to how much you learn and exhibit them and can change. I think, honestly, it's so in that sense, it really sort of leans more way to the side of leadership is learned, not as much as it's innate. Mm-hmm. I think some people are naturally good at influencing people, and influence is a large part of leadership and convincing them that what we're doing is right for them and best for them, as much as is best for the group. But in the sense of learning, all of us can either do that by innately, or someone can learn to do that very well. Similar to what I said about not being a big yeller, I mean, there are people who, grow up and, are more, verbose or loud, or sort of like seem like the strong leader in that sense. And they're very quiet people are just as strong leadership, or just as strong in leadership. So it's definitely a spectrum. There's so much to learn. The better thing to do in the sense of all of us is to focus on how can we learn to be better leaders, and the fact that really anyone, if they want to be, can be a strong leader if they exhibit the traits, empathy, selflessness, proficiency, being good at what you're doing, that bring you to that point of being able to influence people.
From my sister, who was at West Point, she just graduated, and just from watching her and her classmates and her friends, it just seems like habit is such, like, forming habits and non-negotiable habits really at West Point and in the military makes you change so much. Like my sister, when she first went into the military, you would never think that she's going to be like a West Point person. But now it's like those habits that she had to do every single day, making your bed, like respect, all of these things that we're talking about, they're non-negotiable habits that she didn't have a choice really. And that over the course of time, that just changes you as a person. You become more detail oriented, more respectful, more humble, more trustworthy, resilient, all of these things. And it's really, in my view, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but it's a product of habit. It's just the way that you're trained and the way people train you how to be.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think those little habits that we make such big changes about who you are. And another thing I love from Tim O'Brien is in one of his writings, he says a little practice of being brave would have helped a little. Before he went to Vietnam, he always thought, well, at least in the story, he always thought that, I'll be able to have this well of courage and bravery that I can use at some point. I'm saving it up. I'm not going to talk, this person's doing the wrong thing right now, but I don't need to speak up now. And that's the sense that all of us have can make the habit of being brave in our daily lives, because there are, so many little things, whether someone says a slur or someone says a bad joke, that happen daily, where we can stand up and say, that's not the right thing to say. We have to learn from that and be different. Or someone misunderstands something or is mean to someone, why were you so mean? And why don't we include him or her better? I think all those things are habits in the sense too. And you learn in military training, and it's hopeful that you hold on to them, and at times you stray from them and get better, because just like anything else, I went through training almost 5 years ago now. So all I have left are the habits more than I have the moments in training. So, but yeah.
Yeah, courage as a habit. I think that's something that gets easier every time you stand up for someone or you speak up for something. If you do it once, you're more likely to do it again. And then it's just the more often that comes up, it becomes a part of you as a person almost.
Yeah, and just takes that first leap to start the process of building that habit. And it is hard to stand up and do the right thing, but it doesn't have to be if you do it more than that, or if you really, really believe in it.
So when you were deployed, how did that play out? So your first deployment, and maybe what was that like? We can talk a little bit about your experience in Iraq.
Yeah. So first deployment, like I've sort of mentioned, I was a sniper platoon commander. But when you're a sniper platoon commander, especially in this stage of the wars that we're fighting, your sniper teams are given to other companies, so other units within our overall unit, sort of to be in smaller areas. So all of my teams were spread out from Syria to northern Iraq to Kuwait and other places in Iraq at the time. And I was in Western Iraq leading a command center. So I was part of that first line of deciding for, like I've described in the drone warfare, of targeting ISIS, supporting the Iraqis as they were doing the actual military clearance to defeat ISIS along the Euphrates in Western Iraq. And the timeline for that was the most interesting. That was the experience for me that was the closest thing to combat that I experienced, really the life or death that I experienced my second deployment. Very different, which I can describe more in a second. But October 2016, it's obviously right before another election, but President Obama and then the Prime Minister of Iraq at the time announced that the offensive is going into northern Iraq, and it's really the tide is turning against ISIS at that point. And that's when ISIS is the town called Mosul, second largest town in northern Iraq, or in Iraq, by population, which was controlled by ISIS and was taken over in June 2014, again seeing the start of ISIS being that town. So that offensive was starting, and that was a big moment for the deployment. I was in Western Iraq, so we were in a different focus of the mission, but that was sort of the large event. And then again, seeing Trump get elected from in 2017, and sort of the changes, or what didn't change, or how it's sort of funny to come home and have people on supporting different sides of the spectrum be like, man, things must have been different when Trump was president. It was like, they actually weren't that much different. Still like the mission went on. Obama to Trump passed it on, in a very, sort of cohesive manner, at least from my perspective. as I saw it. So, but all those things were sort of interesting times in history to be there. So I was there from early fall 2016 to 2017, all the time that I was there. I was in Western Iraq and sort of supporting my sniper teams from afar with different, however I could. But
when you're over there and when you're serving, are you thinking much about the political decisions going on, or are you more just following orders? Like, for instance, my sister, she can never say anything poorly about Trump or the president or whoever's in charge, because that's her commander in chief. She's not going to say anything about him or her, whoever's in charge. She's just following orders. Was that similar to when you were in Iraq and when you're in the military? You're just following orders. You're not thinking too much about the nitty gritty politics that are going on back here.
Yeah, I think that's one of the strengths of the military by far, is the fact that it's nonpartisan. And that's something that's been attacked at different points, but it's something we need to be appreciative in our democracy, that we are nonpartisan, and we can get in trouble if we say something bad or attend a pro-political rally or something like that, or an anti-rally, because you give up some of your freedoms to serve. And that's, just a part of the basis of what you do. So we lose those freedoms when we're serving, which I think is a good thing and useful. You still sort of have, some ties to back home, obviously, with news and, with being able to talk via phone or anything. You're still somewhat relating and seeing what's going on back home. But I spent most of my sort of workup and time getting ready for that deployment, trying to convince my Marines that, as it looked like, Hillary was thought to be president next, I was trying to convince them that even if Hillary was president, there was still a good chance that we would be in significant or, more intense combat operations than what they're doing now, just because we could see how the mission was going and changing. Because all of them sort of think that, a Democrat, in a very simple understanding, is that a Democrat's less likely to send people to war than a Republican, or to put people in combat, which, obviously over history has not been true. But that's the simple way to explain it. So I spent that time trying to prepare them for that. And then when Trump got elected, it sort of changes things. But we were all watching the election that day, and it was obviously a moment in history to remember. I remember thinking that things would change when I was there, or things would be different, or something would escalate, or sort of change our experience. But obviously over time it didn't. It's nice being away from a lot of the political divisions, and not having to deal with like the day-to-day sort of mindset. You've got something else to think about and focus on that's more important than all of the sort of, worthless political divisions that we have to deal with. But 100% that, you are following the orders. We were following orders all the way up and down the chain, which is a very large chain from like my small unit all the way up to the president. So there are a lot of people in between that you're supporting and following. And the person at the top, does that matter as much? You still have the same boss. You still have the same general over him. It's really not as much him or her. You still have the same general over there. So you sort of go along with it. But.
Yeah, and another thing that I've been thinking about and watching, and really a lot of my information actually comes from Joe Rogan's conversations with various people, and he has Dan Crenshaw is one person who I've watched a little bit of, and Tulsi Gabbard is another one he's had on his podcast. And what I like about their conversations, they're long form conversations like this, where these politicians can explain, and they're both in the military too, so they can explain their thinking on certain political decisions. And Tulsi and Dan Crenshaw disagree on a lot of things, but one major question is, like, why do we keep so many troops in the Middle East, and wouldn't it be better to bring people home? And they disagree on that point, and I'm curious, maybe you can speak to this a little bit, but like, what is the purpose of keeping so many guys over there, and like, why wouldn't we bring people home, or why would we keep guys over in the Middle East area?
Yeah, it's definitely something you think about often. It's like, why is keeping troops over them mean more people like me and my friends and the people I served with will go over at some point, leave their families, potentially experience, sort of the difficult things that you have to experience in a combat zone. But why we leave people there is because of the partnerships that we build. We've got a great partnership with the Iraqi government. Iraqi government has really been so much stronger in the past few years in fighting ISIS and reclaiming their country and strengthening their country from obviously the terrible threat that came in 2014. And to just leave completely is not realistic in a sense, because we still have bases or troops in so many countries around the world. Do we need to leave completely? We have people in Germany, people in Japan, South Korea. We have all of these bases all around the world, and by a comparison, it's important to have a base near your key partners in the region. Iraq should be a key partner in our region for the foreseeable future, as long as anyone or I can imagine, because of all the work that we've done to help build up their country. What troops would do, hopefully, is transition from actual combat operations. So drone warfare would end. There wouldn't be troops going out and actually trying to hunt terrorists or doing that, and that would be all Iraq leading its own mission. And American troops or NATO troops from our strong partnerships that we would have would just be there to either train and not even do as much advising, assisting, not helping them do their missions, but just training and being there for overall support. But I think to pull back entirely would be a mistake. I think my hope very much is that the wars end, and that even in Afghanistan, that there's a peace agreement with the Taliban of some sense of calm as comes to that country after so many years. But for us to just leave the Afghan government entirely and not leave anyone there to train their forces or to support their forces would seem to me, at the very small level of all of these, misguided, in the sense of we've given so much, we have partners over there that we've worked with, and can't imagine to leave them entirely. But do I want troops to deploy in the capacity that I did? No, because I want that war to end, and I want the suffering that goes on during combat to not be experienced by anyone.
What are some of the, and I know this is kind of a rabbit hole, but maybe what are some of the reasons that the war is so extensive and so ongoing for so many years? Why is it so hard to resolve all of the issues that are going on? And maybe this goes back to what was the agreement? The Sykes-Picot Agreement that you're teaching in your class, and that might be maybe the major reason that all of this is occurring. But what leads to the ongoing nature of this war that's going on in the Middle East?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. Sykes-Picot being the original foundation of the borders in the Middle East, at least from Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Kuwait areas, to give that the sense of why we have the countries the way they are. And the issue is that the issue that people would say today is that they didn't respect the actual ethnic sectarian divisions on the ground. So you're creating these sort of fake countries that just exist on paper, but on the ground people see themselves differently. What you have now, after years, almost 100 years from that agreement, is you do have a sense of Iraq nationalism, as I can imagine it as an outsider. You do have a sense of Jordanian nationalism. Syria, through its civil war, is very much fragmented into 3 different regions at this point. So you don't really have that sense of a Syrian nationalism. And you still sort of have a country that doesn't really fit its own borders because of that. So very difficult. I think the divisions and sort of the ethnic divisions, and then terrorism itself, has just torn the region apart, to the fact that we still, the fact that there's still a presence there, the fact that there's still so much, difficult suffering and heartbreak and bombings. All of it has gone down from where it was previously, which is good, and it's very lucky for the sense that there's been so much progress made by the Afghans, by the Iraqis, in their countries. But I remember I worked very closely on my first deployment. I actually got to see him again on my second deployment, of an Iraqi American who was an interpreter, and he had gone back to Iraq to serve against ISIS. He was living in America, but he's like, I want to go back to Iraq and serve as an interpreter and try to help our forces and help the Iraqis beat back the threat. And I asked him, we were just talking sort of randomly, and I remember thinking, I just asked him what is his favorite city in the world, and he's like, Baghdad, pre-03, hands down. And obviously, as Iraqi, so he was born there. So I mean, maybe it might be a little biased, but it is just sad to think about how much these cities have changed and how much suffering is there. When I went to Baghdad briefly, you can sort of see these large expanse on the Tigris of just a beautiful city. And to think about how much heartbreak is there is difficult. Kabul in the 60s and 70s before the real Russian invasion was a very cosmopolitan city as well. And to think about how the destructive forces that have been there for so long is so disappointing, obviously. But to be more concise, I'd say that it's still the ethnic divisions and then the wars that just have been nonstop, fighting over resources, moving away from oil as a society and as a world helps us stabilize the region in a sense because of how much money is poured in and then used for the wrong reasons because of oil and what that brings to the region for the divisions. One of my hopes, we see the Iran deal right now, and if we try to redo the Iran deal and include Saudi Arabia and Israel, then you have, I think, France, Germany, Iran, U.S., Saudi Arabia, and Israel. So everyone, the major players in whatever conflict that could be, come to the table and say, well, this is how we're going to have a peaceful agreement in the Middle East. There is hope for that. Is it how much hope? Probably not as much, but because you can't see some of those countries coming together on the same table. But I am hopeful that progress has been made and that there are a lot of things that people can learn from, and that all of these historical ethnic divisions are not tearing us apart as much as they used to, because people can sort of see the shared humanity that we have through all the suffering that they've dealt with. So I'm hopeful for a change, and to see that the lines that were drawn on the map so many years ago can be sort of taken and to be their own countries now.
So would those lines have to be redrawn, everything reconfigured, or how would that work?
That's a good question. I think for Syria itself as a country is something that will be decided, hopefully, as soon as possible as that war can end. But it's really a stalemate between three different regions right now that have torn the country into three different parts, which are functioning at their own and just fighting a little bit at the different borders, or fighting a decent amount at the borders of the country. Is Syria going to get redrawn? The president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, obviously is fighting to keep his borders intact. But it's just something to see over time. I think Iraq is strong the way it is, or the way its borders are drawn. But things could change. I think it's hard to imagine borders changing and sort of see it, because you sort of learn the world and you learn the map and you think, well, this is how it's always been. Obviously it hasn't, and it's changed in other people's lifetimes. And it could be something that could change. I think Syria would be the place where it would change the most because of the ongoing civil war.
So from your vantage point in Western Iraq, when you were deployed over there, how did you gain knowledge and information about the entire region, and what areas were you really responsible for when you were over there?
Yes. The best thing that I could do, the military does a good job of training you to be, to lead your team. And it does a decent job about preparing you for the culture, but it just can't prepare you as much as you need to be prepared for the culture and the history and the geography. So what I did is I read a lot of books about the Middle East before I went, and then while I was there, I was still reading a lot of books to try and learn as much as I can about, the two main sects of Islam, Shia versus Sunni. I read books from a Shia perspective. I read books from a Sunni perspective. I read books from the American perspective of the conflict, and I tried to read books from sort of the Middle Eastern perspective as well, to not be skewed by one way. So reading a lot of books helped. Talking to my interpreters, I would spend extra time talking to, just hanging out and trying to learn from them about their take in Iraq. But studying the maps, I every day because I was in a command center on a computer, I was pretty much just studying the map or looking at the Euphrates. And it is, as we all learn, and sort of the foundation of our history, or as humans, the cradle of civilization. It is bizarre to then see yourself right next to the Euphrates in that world where we all, have some level of heritage to learn that. But I studied the map, I studied the names, I studied the towns. I like Eliot Ackerman's Places and Names, the title and sort of one of the stories of talking about how you learn where you are by the places and names and the dates of what happened in all that time. So as I was early trying to prepare my platoon to go over to deployment, we knew we were going to go to this base in Western Iraq. That's right off the Euphrates. And I drew on a whiteboard sort of the curve of the Euphrates to like sort of, get the team in the mindset of this is where we're going to be. And then a contractor came over who was a former Marine, and then he pointed at the board and he was like, that was my patrol base. And he was just pointing to this random spot right sort of across the river, but he could, everyone who deploys that region starts to learn the map that well, that he just saw a bend in what looked like a river, and he was like, yep, that was me in Anbar province. So, eventually you learn that as you spend time over there and, every day studying the map and, watching the towns from the drone feeds that I saw, just like sort of learn the people and the population as you see it. And, something I'll never forget that area. I could name the cities on the Euphrates still today, and it's something that's sort of burned into your mind from how long you spend staring at it and trying to learn it.
And how long were you over there again? How long were you in Western Iraq?
So that was my first deployment, which was about 7 months.
7 months.
And then I went back on my second deployment, 2018, from March to October 2018, and I bounced around. The war had changed by then. ISIS had been kicked out of Iraq almost entirely, at least by holding territory, which was a big win to see. When I went back to that same base where I was on my first deployment, it felt much more calm. There was a coffee shop that was opened up on base, and I was like, okay, things are good now. But it was, that was a cool moment to see and sort of see the changes that had come through a lot of hard work, obviously from Iraqis and the coalition supporting them. But and then second deployment, I bounced around to Syria, Afghanistan. I spent a lot of time in Kuwait, but bounced around to those other areas in Iraq. That's when I went to Baghdad on another base in Anbar province as well. So sort of saw the whole spectrum. So I was still studying the area, and obviously I was close to the mission still in Western Iraq, so I still had that oversight of what was going on there. So it was another 7 months of studying the region that got me to remember it so well.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing all this information. I'm sure it's going to be, really valuable for people to listen to this, and especially the guys and girls in your class. I'm sure they're soaking up a lot of information, the syllabus.
Hopefully.
I want to jump in. You got some T.S. Eliot in there.
Yep.
Which is great. Some humility, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that goes back to humility being the leadership sort of trait I always thought from his line about humility in one of his 4 quartets that I've always loved.
I love that poem. East Coker, right?
East Coker, yeah. Nice. The only wisdom you can hope to acquire is the wisdom of humility. Humility is endless.
Love it.
Always remember it.
When did you read that? Was that just on your own, or
that was actually a senior elective at Rome Park.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. No, it was a senior elective called Wasteland.
All about T.S. Eliot?
All about T.S. Eliot, and I loved it. My sister, who was a Bryn Mawr girl, also took it, and then she said, you have to take this class when you're senior. I was like, okay, I will.
Do you remember who taught that class?
Dr. Sound. I don't know if he's still here. I got to see if he's around. I assume he left. He was saying he was going to leave back when I was there, but a lot of our friends took it, remembered it. I've always sort of held on to T.S. Eliot. That was the quote that I wrote in my sort of book at infantry school. That's what I wrote on the wall. So it's always been something I've held on to.
Yeah, it's an amazing poem, 4 Quartets. There's actually online on YouTube. It's T.S. Eliot reads that whole poem. I'm sure you've.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I
gotta check that out.
Yeah. Well, I usually look things like that up because when I'm reading poetry or reading, some Shakespeare in college, I had to kind of have someone read it to me as I'm reading it. It just helps my processing a little bit more. But it's cool to have T.S. Eliot actually read that out loud.
Yeah.
Thinking back to your experience at Gilman, what maybe advice or guidance or thoughts would you maybe have to someone here right now, whether they're in middle school or lower school or high school, about to move on to college and the next step in their life? Do you have any kind of thoughts for people who are here now?
Yeah. I remember my time at Gilman, obviously very fondly and very, very well, of all the teachers that I had and the mentors. And, Jeffrey Gilman was my advisor, obviously still here, great support to so many people around the school. And the lessons that I really got was just the chance to learn as much as you can and be open to learning. I think the opportunities you have here are so many, whether it's, being able to go to office hours or talk to a teacher and learn from a teacher more, or have the creativity to, join your own group or make your own club or something like that, or, just be on a team and have that support. So there's so many great opportunities there. The thing that I would always say is that it's all about the people that you're with. So hold on to those relationships that you can, whether it's friends or whether it's teachers, and cherish them as much as you can. One of the things that I sort of had a funny sort of memory as I've been watching the lower school play sports is that I think that I'm sort of struck by the fact that as I see two kids arguing about a rule in like some little baseball game they're playing, that I think kids and students and us and the grown-ups have much shorter memories about getting angry at people.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the capacity to forgive is so much stronger when you're younger than it is when you're older. And I think there's so many things that we, in this divided world, that we sort of can let us divide us from friends, whether it's politically, like divide us from friends, or even intra-family being divided that way. I think there's so much more that we can learn from each other if we have that sense of unity and have that sense of forgiveness that sometimes you lose as you get older. It's like, no, I'm not talking to him anymore. He did that one thing, I'm not talking to him anymore. It's like,
holding a grudge.
It's like, why do we don't do that as much when we're younger? And I think it's something to hold on to as you transition out of Gilman and get on through college and beyond.
I love that. Yeah, forgiveness is something that is really missing in our society right now. It's like, and I've talked about this before, but I've just read Matthew McConaughey's memoir, Green Lights, and one of the things he tells, which I think was one of the strongest points he makes in that book, is he when he gets famous, he like needs to humble himself. So he decides to go to Mali in Africa, and when he was in Africa, he was staying with this tribe over there, and the people he was with or he was staying with got into like a fierce argument about something, and I remember Matthew like jumped in, and he's explaining how he jumped in and tried to settle things down, and someone else who was in the room says, they're not fighting, they're not arguing, they're just trying to understand each other. And that really struck me, because we can get into an argument about whatever it is that we want to talk about and we disagree, but we're not so much arguing and holding a grudge against each other and getting into a fight, as we're just trying to understand each other. And afterwards it's easy to, or it's hard, but it should be that we forgive each other for whatever it is that goes down. We're trying to come to an agreement and try to understand each other a little bit better. So I like that word of advice, is forgiveness. It really is missing in our world today.
Yeah, and it's sad. I mean, it's why can't we forgive or have a tough argument and then realize there's so much more that we have in common than this little thing that we disagree on. And that goes back to tribe a little bit. It's just the sense of unity as a society or as a friendship or a group. We're missing. And I think forgiveness is the part of that we're just not good at it.
Yeah. Jay, it's been an awesome time on the podcast today. Thanks so much for coming on, and best of luck to you in your class. I'm hoping that I could maybe stop by and check it out one of these days.
Yeah, anytime. I love it. Thanks, Jake. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.